Hello. When getting started in DocuWare Workflow, one of the very first things you need to understand and set are going to be the conditions, the trigger conditions for those documents that will begin your workflow process. When setting up your triggers, if you set up a new workflow, one of the first tabs here you'll see is the trigger conditions, and this will give you a couple different options. You have your first tabs up here, uh, and kind of as they're worded, the document events will be based on index values that you store those documents with, or maybe the index values that have changed. And then when scheduling, what you'll have is you'll be able to set a specific time of day, um, and the frequency of how often it repeats, as well as the index values that will match under that given schedule. First ones we'll look at here are going to be your document events. That will be for the index values for when a document is stored. That will allow your workflow to trigger, but you can also have it trigger documents that have already been stored in DocuWare and that those index values may have changed. Um, and then you also have a option here that will allow you to trigger documents specifically from a form that was set up in the DocuWare Forms module. The main two that we'll be looking at today are the new and the index change conditions. So in setting up the new document conditions, these are pretty straightforward. What you're going to have is this lower section. You'll be able to set however many index fields that you want that meet the condition for the documents that you're trying to trigger. One of the most used fields that I see and something I recommend would be using a document type field. So let's say we're making an AP type of workflow, and we want this workflow to be triggered for any document type that has a document type value of invoice. Um, Now, you can also use something like a status field. This is something very important, I feel, when setting up workflows. Uh, and this can be used a couple different ways. Um, One fields like this that I do recommend would be used as a fixed index field for in your store dialogues in DocuWare. Um, this eliminates the possibilities of um, maybe mistyping some of those document types or statuses, um, and then inadvertently some of those documents don't get triggered in the workflow. Um, so using those fixed values in the dialogues is a good idea, and having different dialogues there. So let's say you have a store dialog for your invoices or a store dialog for your purchase orders. Um, you will have the document type and status fields set already, um, so they they'll match the conditions when those documents are stored. Um, with the status field, a lot of times I recommend any new document, just fix the status of new. And the benefit of that is as you go through the workflow, what we can do is change the status field to different statuses. So maybe one of the first steps, you're going to set the workflow to go to an approval for an employee at the company, and maybe the status will become now pending approval. Or likewise, maybe you have a process that takes two levels of approval, and the first person approves it, and you can say um, awaiting a second approval or something along those lines. And the nice part about that is it helps keep track. If someone is searching for that document in DocuWare, you'll be able to see pretty quickly, just at a glance, based on that status field, where your document is in the workflow. Even if maybe the documents aren't assigned to you, so you're not seeing the workflow task, but you want to quickly look at maybe the documents that are waiting for that first approval or waiting for that second approval. Um, there's a lot of benefits to using that status field, and I always recommend trying to utilize that. Um, and maybe you use a status field for a couple other processes in DocuWare. What you can always do is set a field for workflow status. Maybe just hide it under certain conditions, like in the store dialog. You don't need to have the workflow status visible. but you can always still set it to new and hide the field. But this way, when you do a search, then you can make that status visible again, and same thing, be able to search for documents and quickly glance and see where it is in the workflow. Now, when using um, the option for index entries have changed, this is where sometimes it can cause a little bit of confusion. Now, again, you can do any combination of these starting values here for either new documents, the documents were changed, or even the merge forms. Um, when you have both set up for new documents and index changes, the values that are in the lower box will always be the same conditions that you would have set if you were just setting for a new document. So if I wanted the same values that we had a second ago, if I had a value for document type as invoice and a status of new, this will meet the new document condition. Now, when using the index entries have changed, uh, this could be used for a couple different reasons. Um, Sometimes you can use this to create a secondary workflow, maybe where the document went through one workflow first, and then maybe under certain conditions, it does need to go through a second workflow that'll do a little bit different process, or a process that happens a little later on after maybe a document is stamped and an index is changed from there. Um, so the other way of utilizing this as well is from a more of like a management standpoint, and that could be if a document has already gone through the workflow, or maybe you have to stop that workflow instance, but you need to re-trigger that document and get it back into your workflow. That's where this option can come in handy, where you can go in and just change an index value, and then allow it to take that document and start the workflow from the top. Um, this also comes in handy if, let's say, you make some changes to a workflow, and you create a new workflow version. Now, if a document's already in that workflow, it's going to always stay in the version that it started in. So if I made a change, now let's say my workflow previously was in version 5, and I do an edit because I realize there's certain conditions that I might need to fix. I make those changes, I save, I publish, and now my current workflow version is version 6. That document that was already in the workflow is still going to be in version 5 until it exits the workflow. So if we were to take that document out of the workflow, and now I want that document to start in my new version that had the changes, then maybe all I have to do is just change a status field. So for example, we still want to use maybe the document type for invoice, because again, those are the only documents that would trigger this workflow. And what we could use is this status field and use one of these other conditions here where maybe it um, does not equal new. So that could be it. If you pulled the document maybe out of the workflow at any given point, could have an index such as approved or rejected, or review for deletion. And if I were to just go into the edit index entries in DocuWare for that document and change that to new, no matter what that value was prior, that would meet those conditions, because prior to the change, that it went from something that wasn't new to something that was new. Now, something to keep in mind is if a value is empty, um, and then you fill that value with new, just be aware that this condition will not match. Um, with the way Docker is currently set up, it will have to be not empty, and then it has to have a value. It does not consider it a change, it considers it just a new value. So just something to keep in mind um, when you're using a does not equal. Um, and maybe something along those lines. Let's say that status could either be empty or something else. Then maybe what you want to do is use this drop down up here to do, instead of all the conditions where every one of these lines would have to meet, you could do any. And this way it's only any one of these lines. And what we can do here is, since the after condition still has a document type of invoice, you're still okay with that document triggering, or that workflow triggering on documents with that document type. But what we could do is now do if the status is either empty or if the status does not equal new. And this way that does match the condition for the change when we look at the status field. Again, it's something that catches people off guard, and they may think their workflow doesn't trigger. Um, just keep in mind, coming from an empty empty index field, excuse me, um, or coming from an index field that has a value, they do act a little differently. And as you see here, you can add as many lines as you want, and as many conditions. Sometimes you need to get a little more specific. If you have very similar documents in DocuWare with similar values, and you may need to set, 3, 4, 5 different index fields to match those trigger statements. Um, Now the other option up here for scheduled workflows, again, as I said earlier, you can set these to happen either daily, weekly, monthly. So this could be something like a report maybe that you can set monthly, or maybe just certain, using same example as prior, certain invoices um, that will trigger new workflow task for each one of those documents that meet those conditions at the time it's set. So let's say I want it to trigger every day at 9:30 and do a particular task, but maybe that task is only for those invoices that come from a certain company. Now, as you can see here, this lower section for the trigger conditions, it is a little different from the document events triggers. Um, this one gives you a little bit more of an advanced conditions where you can kind of nest your conditions a little bit better. Where you saw in the document events, it's either all of the lines that you enter or any one. Whereas in here, maybe I want a workflow or an invoice that only matches for when two specific companies um, are the documents that I want to trigger this workflow. So I can set this value to maybe DocuWare. So now any invoices that came from Mike and Tech or from DocuWare, those will meet that trigger condition, and they will start the workflow for that document. But if it's from let's say company XYZ, that document will not meet these conditions. Um, Now, as you see here, you have your options for and or. Similarly to the document events where it was any or all lines, you can change the operator here, um, based on whatever your conditions are in that moment. Um, what gets a little confusing here is the way the plus signs are set up. These plus signs will add your new lines. And if you mouse over it, it'll tell you can either create a new rule or create a group of rules. This is where the nesting comes into play here. And what you'll want is maybe I want to add another company down the road. I would just add another line by hitting this first plus sign underneath your operator here, and that'll add a new line. You can also remove that line from the minus sign. Um, but maybe I want to go even further, where we have a where either one of these companies match, but I also want maybe a date that was within the past day, um, and then this way this still all meets those conditions, and this can get as advanced as you'd like. Um, yeah, again, you can keep nesting multiple indexes as you go. But that covers the triggers. Um, Again, maybe schedule isn't used as often, um, but the document events, it's very important to understand what changes in the file cabinet will allow that workflow to be triggered on that document. Um, in the upcoming videos, we'll go into more detail of some more tips and tricks for setting up workflows. And until then, we'll see you next time. Thank you.